So, welcome to Taking the Tradition On. Welcome to Series 6, and it is Wondrous Creatures. As ever, we are going to be here for about an hour, an Amy hour. It is a combination of storytelling and discussion, and we tend to be a little bit heavy on the discussion. This is the chance to have those conversations with storytellers that we don't always get a chance to have, and my chance to ask all those questions that I want to ask, and to find out a little bit more about the storyteller that is my guest tonight. We are streaming to YouTube. If you're watching later on YouTube, very welcome. If you're on YouTube right now and you want to come into the Zoom room live, then just hop over. I have put the link in the chat. Please say hi in the chat as we go along. Be a Q&A at the end. But tonight we are here for Wondrous Creatures. As ever, I'd like to thank my marvellous patrons who make this possible and make it so that there's a wonderful archive of conversations up on YouTube that is free to all forever. So do have a look through and look at some of the other episodes and other series. And if you want to press the subscribe button, that would be really helpful and just makes us a little bit easier to find. So, tonight, my guest is my very, very first ever guest that I had for Taking the Tradition On. Right at the very beginning, just as lockdown started, I asked my guest, Nick Hennessey, if he would come and help me figure out how to have conversations on Zoom, how to turn a podcast into a video cast. And YouTube took so long to set up the account that we weren't able to stream it, and I wasn't able to put up that very, very first one. And as some of the people who said they're probably the best episode as well of Taking the Tradition On. So I had to put it right. We had to have Nick back again so that everybody can see and hear him. If you haven't come across Nick Hennessey before, he's an internationally acclaimed storyteller, singer and musician. He's told stories for, it says on his website, more than 20 years. I think that's getting on for 30 years.
Oh, yes,
we've been telling stories about as long as each other.
It definitely will. I think you were on it a bit earlier than me, but yes, no, it's definitely, yeah. So it's over 25 years now, yeah.
We've been around a long time, though. He's a bit more famous than me, and he's been at the South Bank Centre, the Albert Hall. He's toured all over the place: Estonia, Finland, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark. He's been around Japan a couple of times. But pretty much now settled in the Lake District, and that's always been his base for as long as I've known him. The place where he grew up, which we're going to be talking about more tonight, he's always been, like me, very much in landscape-based storytelling. I'm really interested in that connection with land and story and myth, and he has chosen as his wondrous creature tonight white mare. So Nick, I'm going to spotlight you and ask you to come and join me while everybody goes wild on the chat, because you are completely marvellous.
Well, it's very nice to be here. Thank you, Amy. I think people liked it so much the last time because it never got to be recorded. So it's one of those things you can't. Now we're going to disprove it's going to be, it's not going to be the best anymore. That's for sure.
I don't know. Well, you have got some stiff competition, I will say that.
Yeah, no, that's true. There was no competition back then. It was just you and me. In fact, when lockdown happened, and you said, "Will you come online and do some online?" I just got to the point of saying to myself, "Do you know what? No, I'm not going to do anything online. No, I'm not. It's not going to work. It's not going to work." And you said, "Will you come and do it?" I went, "Yeah, okay."
and this space is great. Here we are. We've got it's just this wonderful little bubble, so we can talk to people all over the world and all over time as well. So if you're watching live, fantastic. And if you're visiting us or revisiting us sometime in the future, welcome to this little bubble of time where we can all exist together. And it's a magical kind of elsewhere space, which is exactly, I think, where White Mare is going to be taking us.
In fact, if you're in the future, could you put something in the chat about what the future's like? It'd be great to know.
It would be. So I'm very excited about white mares. I know why I want to know more about them and why I'm excited about them and what I know so far, but I want to know why you have chosen white mare as your wondrous creature.
Well, it all comes to one story, you know. It all comes down to one story, and that's the story that I grew up with in Alderley Edge in South Manchester, Cheshire, and I grew up there. And from a young age, we used to go up and play on this place that we called the Edge, that I knew as the Edge. And then at about the age of 5, maybe 6, I think my mother told me. Very truncated. She was no storyteller, but she knew the truncated story, and she told me it. And from that moment of being told the story, my relationship to the place changed. So as I say, you know, Sundays we go up for a walk up there. We just run around. I mean, as a kid, it was a fascinating place. There's lots of caves. There's, you know, dips and dells and paths that lead through the forest, and then open vistas with big views and cracks in the ground that you can stare into. And actually, back then in the 70s, you could actually get into the caves, which you can't do now.
Right, I'm going to stop you just there for a moment,
Yes.
because I think you are sounding a little bit like you are down a cave. What you're saying is brilliant, but you've gone a bit quiet.
Oh, that's weird. Wonder why that would be.
Well, Zoom just resets itself, and I think maybe I'm sat a little bit closer to the computer.
Okay, well, should I sit a bit? Does that help if I'm a bit closer?
Yeah, or you can turn yourself up on the audio settings.
Can I?
Yes, you
Let's
can.
have a look at these. That's fine. Where would I find that?
So if you go to the mic. So we did do the settings earlier, and it was one of those things that resets itself. So you go to the little microphone button, click onto that, audio settings at the bottom.
Audio settings, there we go. And input volume, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go, let's turn that up there. Come on, move now. Move. Won't move. The little thingy won't move. Oh, that's because it's automatically adjust. There we go. Let's try that. Is that a bit better?
How's that sounding? Are we about the same level now?
Is that everyone happy with that? Is that better?
Joe's saying it sounds great.
Great, good.
They are saying don't move backwards and forwards too much.
Right. Okay. I'll try and stay this distance.
Equidistant to the mic, please, Nick.
I might have to move that up a little bit. There we go. So yeah, grew up in this little village, which is kind of a suburb of Manchester. It has a very interesting history, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we used to go up onto the Edge and and walk about and play. And then at some point, my mum told me the story about the place, which is the legend of Alderley Edge. And from that moment, my relationship to it changed. The place changed. So when I went, I remember going up there, having heard the story and found, you know, I might have been 6 or 7, something like that. My perspective of what it was I was walking around shifted. Everything sort of deepened, and the landscape and the story became the same thing. So on some level, I was conscious that I was walking through the story and the place. And that was a very strong formative experience for me for all of my life, really, in this relationship between place and story, between landscape and story, and has been a kind of driving passion of mine all the way through my storytelling career. But the story has in it a white mare, a white horse, and it's the most it's a powerful symbol and character through the story. It's only a brief story, but I feel like the horse is the place, really, and you know, we carry stories and the in the same way that we're carried by a horse, I think, and this sense of the horse being the earth, this kind of contact, this relationship to the ground through horses, their earthiness. And so because that story is so significant, and when you and I talked, it seemed to me that the horse was the kind of the key to it all. In fact, the horse is the key to the story, and since the story is the key to my storytelling, it makes sense that, you know, that the horse is front and center.
And for me, I'm so excited to be talking about this story because it's one of the very first traditional stories that I remember being aware of, and reading the book The Weird Stone of Brisingamen by Alan Garner. and the prologue is that story.
Yeah.
And again, just having a really, I've still never been there. I really want you to take me up there.
Oh, definitely.
Please,
Oh, yeah. What great
please
idea.
take me to Alderley Edge.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because it's just this magical place for me that just absolutely the story has become this place, and it just absolutely set my imagination on fire. When I first started telling stories, it's one of the first that I told because it had just become internalized and part of my being, even though I'd never been to the place, and also part of my journey of finding all the stories that are where I live and are of this place. And that story is a cousin to some of the stories that are around here as well. But it is a milk white mare. It's not a grey mare. For anybody you talk to with horses, normally a white horse is called grey horse, but it's always the milk white mare, and she does crop up in other stories as well, which I might make you talk about later.
Yeah.
But I think we're talking about the story. I don't know if everybody knows it, Nick. So I think you need to tell it.
Sounds like a cue.
It does, doesn't it?
Well, the story is as simple a story as you could ever hear, really. And the story goes that there's this farmer, and he lives down Mobberley Way, and he has in this white mare, and he's really fond of this mare, but he has to sell her. So back end of October, he decides to set off for Macclesfield Market. Well, it was still dark when he left at first strike, left his farm, leaving his dog yaffling away in the yard. But by the time he's clombing up the brew at the edge, it's just fetching light. And all the leaves in the trees are all gold and bright in the shim of the early morning light. Anyway, he comes to this place called Thieves' Hole. And when he gets there, the horse stops, won't budge. Choose what he does, the horse won't move. And then at the side of the road, there's this old chap, this old fella, tall and thin he is. And he's got in his hand this proper sort of stick. It's all skeleton and that. And the old fella ups and speaks. He says, that's a fine horse you've got there. Will you sell it to me? And, well, the farmer looks this old chap up and down, and he shakes his head. And, it seems to have stopped my video. The host has asked you to start your video. Start my video. It's all right. You hear me? You got me?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Well, so this old fella ups and speaks. He says, will you sell me your horse? Well, the farmer looks this old chap up and down and shakes his head. He said, no, I won't sell it to the likes of you. Well, the old fella shakes his head himself and shrugs his shoulders. He says, yeah, well, fair enough. You go your way, but you'll find no one to buy your horse, and I'll be waiting here on your return. So the farmer shakes the reins and the horse clops on, and he makes his way off to Macclesfield, and there he ties up his horse and he waits. Well, it's a busy day at the market, but nobody says anything to him, not a single person. A few people stop and tell him what a fine mare she is, but nobody offers to buy her. And then by the end of the day, he has to set off back home, doesn't he? Well, it's just fetching dark when he passes Thieves' Hole again, and there's this old chap. But of course, it's the farmer that ups and speaks this time, and he says, go on then, how much will you give her for me? And the old man says, enough, you come with me. Well, they go then from Thieves' Hole by Seven Firs and Golden Stone to Stormy Point and Saddle Bowl, until they come to this outcrop of rock, as big as a house like. And the old chap, he takes his skeleton stick and he touches the rock, and suddenly it splits open. There's a crack and a flash, and the rock splits open. And there are these two iron gates. Well, he touches them with his stick and they open, and there's this hole going into the hill. Well, of course, by now the farmer's all afraid. He said, oh, you can take the horse. I don't want out for her, but just let me go. Well, the old man says, you come, mate. You'll come to no harm. Come on. And he leads him into the hill. They go thrutching in through the cave. Deeper and deeper and deeper they go into the belly of the hill till they come to this cavern. And in the cavern, the ground is strewn with men, all dressed in armour. And each and every one of them is sleeping with their head on a horse. But there's one, a top man, bigger than all the others, and he's lying with nothing but a ruck of stones to rest his head on. And the old chap says, this here is the sleeping army. And they're sleeping and waiting until the last battle of the world comes. And whenever that comes, I'm to wake them. but you see, I'm one horse short for the top man, and your horse will do nicely. And then he leads him into another cave, and it's full of gold and silver and all sorts. And the old fella says, you take whatever you need, and you and I will call our business done. Well, the farmer, he sets to, doesn't he? He falls on his knees, and he fills his pockets of his coat, and he fills his hat, and he fills his breeches, and he fills his boots until he can carry no more. And the old man says, now, you, think on. And then he leads him back through the cave, and he shoves him out through the iron gates, and there's a clatter and a bang, and the rock closes, and the farmer finds himself outside in a night as black as a bag. Well, he makes his way home as best he can, and he tells his story as best he may. And the next day, him and his friends, they come back, and they go by Seven Firs and Golden Stone to Stormy Point and Saddle Bowl, but they never found that rock as big as a house. And neither they, nor him, nor anyone has seen those iron gates since. And that's that.
Fantastic. Yeah, just fantastic. Oh, I love that story, and the description in it is just wonderful. But it's very different, actually, to the way that you normally tell. So if people are coming on here and they haven't heard you tell before, it is slightly different to your usual way of telling. There's still a lot of you in it,
Yeah.
but the description and the places, and I've heard you tell it a few times over the years, and it's changed, and it's come full circle, really.
It has. It's a journey. It's been a journey in itself, and I've come to realise a number of things about the story and my relationship to it, more importantly. And that is that when I first, I heard the story, I never thought of telling it. I never told it to anyone when I was a kid. It wasn't until I was started storytelling that I realised I had this story that I knew, that I started telling it. And as you do, you start to embellish it. As I started to find my feet as a storyteller and practice the craft and learn it, you start to, really get in there and push it out and try it on and, all that kind of stuff. And that's all well and good. And I think that's essential. But as the time went on, I found myself, I didn't really tell it that often. And I also felt I didn't really know the story that well, despite the fact I told it a lot. And that's because I think I'd gone too far into my own version of it. I'd have gone in too far into my embellishments, and they didn't have anywhere to hang. And it wasn't until I started doing a little bit of work with Alan Garner himself, that I realised my responsibility was not to embellish the story and make it my own. That's not what this story is for me. There might be for others, and that's all well and good. And there are lots of stories that my responsibilities are different to. But in this one, I feel that if in order for me to constantly learn from it, I have to go to it and not bring it to me. So, the embellishments have gone, a lot of them, and I found myself concentrating on the language, found myself concentrating on the language that makes it very particular. Because as you mentioned, there's lots of versions of that story around. There's a Welsh version, there's one up in Simonside Hills in Northumberland, and they're all, you could say they're all the same story, but the fact of the matter is they're not the same story. Yes, there are similarities with other stories, but that doesn't make them the same story. That makes them similar, and I think there's something very important about what makes a story universal is what makes it particular. So a story is only really speaks to everybody if it speaks from its place. And so to try and make that story too universal, you lose a lot of that specific relationship to play. So I found myself, two things happened in the last 10 years. One is that I realized I was better going back to the closest version I could find to the oral tradition, which is basically going back to Alan Garner's grandfather, because he wrote it down pretty much as Alan wrote it down pretty much as best he could as his grandfather told it. And so first of all, that, because there is a beauty, there is such power in in the sparse nature of the telling. And it is a simple story,
but it is so
so
crafted.
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound crafted.
No.
And that's the language is beautiful.
It is, but I think my time with being a ballad singer and a singer and working with folk song, I realized I realized I needed to go back to the story and tell it as a song, like you would sing a song, rather than tell it as a story that you want to get in and pull about a bit and stick a conservatory on and stick a little bit of a wing on here and a wing on there, or dress it up how you want. I realized I actually needed to go to it like I would a song, because a traditional song, I might tinker with words here and there and rhythms, but still the map is there, and that's what's important with this story, is the map. And so there are things in that story that are essential to that particular version. So that was the first thing, was I realized I needed to go back to the kind of as close to that as possible. And then when I got there and started working with it, I had an opportunity to tell the story at an event that Alan was at, and he came up to me afterwards and said, that is now your story. I'm really grateful, and it's yours. And I realized that I could then get deeper into it without worrying about, it comes from his grandfather, all that kind of stuff, that kind of appropriation. Because, we as storytellers have the debate about cultural appropriation. But, let me tell you that the culture is, it's a microcosm. You can have the same argument about one street to another. So what applies to an entire cultural story also applies to a version of a story that comes from a very particular place. So that territory was open up to me, and I realized that my job was to serve the story as best I could as to the way it was passed on to me. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that of many of my stories that I tell, the repertoire that I tell. It would be of songs, but not of stories. If for the most part, a lot of the stories that I've heard or tell, I've made them my own. But with this, the margins for making it my own are far, far narrower. And then so after that, having some time, after that sort of moment with Alan, if you like, I then did a whole piece. He asked me to do a whole show, a whole piece about Alderley Edge, which was a fantastic journey. But in that, I sort of discovered the power of the potential of dialect words, rather, I should say. And though as a kid, I'm a middle class boy, I didn't grow up in a working class environment, but there were lots of local working class kids around that I played with and hung out with. And there were quite a few dialect words. But I got myself a 19th century Cheshire dialect book, and I started looking, and I was like, oh God, these words, that we all used. I never used in my house, but down the end of the road in the amusement arcade, we were using them all the time. And I realised that there was something about that language that I felt very close to and wanted to explore for that story, really. So there's some fantastic phrases in there. I mean, interestingly, I don't know. We used to call trousers kecks. I don't know if you ever, don't know if anyone else has come across that. Kecks is a dialect word for celery. And celery has, it's basically,
it's like cords.
It's got holes in the middle of it. They're like trousers. So, so kecks and celery became, trousers and celery kind of shared that. So there's lots of lovely little phrases that I discovered, and it made me sort of look at my upbringing in Alderley and see those moments when I was encountering something deep, that wasn't necessarily reflected in my upbringing and my house, but was, in the landscape, in the place. And then when I was researching for this thing about Alderley, I just suddenly found the whole of Alderley was actually built on is it actually a what's the word, fault line in the rock, and that it's built across two worlds. And Alderley Edge as a village itself was built across two worlds, because it was built once the trains came, excuse me, in 1800s, 1849 or 1842. When the train line came, the prospectors came and started building all these expensive villas for the rich mill owners to come, and so they didn't have to live in Salford next to the shite they were pumping out. They could come and have a nice life over here. So that all these big villas were up on the top of the hill, and then in order to staff all those houses, they then built all of the the back-to-back tenements, two up, two down tenement houses in the village, where the shops were. And even when I was a kid, I remember there being an awareness of two prices, prices for them up there. It wasn't in operation, but it was in memory, of a price for the people up the top of the hill and the price for the people at the bottom. So so I started to draw on that very specific what's the word, local law in its broadest sense, and started to find language that I wanted that had that kind of musical power that would draw the story closer into its source, really.
Everybody's got very excited about keks.
Have they?
And
yes, they do. Well, keks are exciting.
It's one word, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's the thing. That's the thing about dialects is that we have all of these words that change maybe just slightly from place to place, and but those sort of colloquial language, and it's kind of, as soon as you hear that word, it takes you back to a certain time and a certain place and a certain locality. And again, so there are lots of different places that everybody's going, oh no, we do know about keks here, and it's all spelled differently, but it's sort of straight away, it's like, oh yes,
yeah,
absolutely, that thing about making it particular and universal by making it particular.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think the lack of the increasing absence of dialect words and phrases is a great tragedy, really. I mean, I know it's probably a debate that's been had, or a whinge that's been going on for ages, and I get that, for the generations. But me myself, I feel that, and I even try to use words around my kids so they can at least hear them, even though they might not know, they might not pick them up and use them, because I think that's important to find, unique language rather than just this one English, to find those other phrases, like skelled. That's fantastic. He has in his hand this skelled, this stick that's all skelled and that. I mean, twisted, skelled. It's fantastic. It's in there, isn't it? The meaning is in the sounds.
Well, and it makes it sound like a song or a spell, and it's spells have always been about words, because words have power, and I think that's the thing. I think there is a whole thing with storytellers that we think we need to find our own voice and our own way of telling, and our unique perspective and our unique voice, and that's such a modern view. It's one of those things that I think storytellers of old, you'd have your bum kicked if you were trying to find your own voice. It's like you're telling it wrong. You're not listening. You're not learning it properly. You've got no respect. I'm teaching you the story. I know how it goes. That's how it's supposed to be. There's none of this go off and make it all different just for the sake of it.
No.
And it's so recent, this whole thing of, you've got to change it and make it yours straight away. And obviously, I got a lot of stories from Duncan, and people say that they can hear Duncan in the way that I tell, and I take that as a great compliment. Absolutely. I can't be Duncan. I'm not Duncan. I'm not a Scottish traveller, but there is the rhythm and the way of passing a story on so that it doesn't change out of all recognition, and it's still got the heart and it's still got the heartbeat. And I remember Duncan saying to me, there's only 3 things you can't change about a story, Amy. It's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And and that's it. I took it as a joke, but kind of like now, the more and more I think on that, and I kind of I understand it in a much better, much deeper way, and I absolutely see what he was trying to say now.
It's like that 3 stages of man, isn't it? You know, the first stage is my daddy's bigger than your daddy. The second stage is, oh, shut up, Dad, you haven't a clue what you're bloody talking about. And the third stage is, as my wise father once said. And the relationship is the same. You know, we go through that journey, don't we? We go through that kind of, right, I'm a story, here we go. I know how this story goes. And then at some point, you know, you come right back. And I think that story is that for me. And actually, it's funny you should mention Heartbeat. I recorded a version of it last year, and found and ended up putting a heartbeat in it. Actually putting a heartbeat, because the sound of it, and I realized that the telling of it for me, it's a bit like when I sing. So I never tell stories to myself, but I do sing to myself, and I sing to myself because because there's some, I mean, partly because of the vibration, you know, the singing, all that kind of stuff that goes on in the body, but it's something for me to have a relationship with myself through, whereas telling a story I don't. But this version of the story, I find myself, I do tell this to myself sometimes. And because it's not performed as such, you know, there's, you know, I struggle to tell this story standing up. You know, I feel like I need to be sitting down. It needs to be this kind of situation to pass it on. Or almost, you know, sitting at a bus queue, quickly telling somebody. It's that kind of story, but it's got so much power and so much and the reason that I feel that is because it's got a heartbeat. It's close to me. I can feel my heart in it. I can feel the place in my heart. And when I tell the story, that's what I want to tell. And as long as I do that, I can't do anything about whether anyone gets the story or not. I stop telling it for other people. I tell it for myself, and you know, and that's all I can do. You know, I just try to serve the story, and not bother about the rest. So it's as a performance, it's really it's very different from anything else, I think, that I tell.
I think it is, but I really love it, and there's so many different ways I want to take this conversation now. Because coming back to the white mare and the heartbeat, but no, it's that thing, isn't it? She's sort of, the white mare is absolutely central to this story, and at the same time on the periphery. And you were talking about her being like the earth at the beginning, and that, but when a horse is walking, it sounds like a heartbeat.
Yes.
And that connection with the earth and the rhythm of hoofbeats, and I think that thing of telling and singing with horses is a really interesting thing, which I haven't got to do for a while, but I have done it in the past. And that thing of traveling with horses, and obviously sort of that's where a lot of my tradition comes from. You know, sort of talking to Duncan, he was the horsey man. He travelled with horses all the time, and he would tell stories to himself. Sometimes you'd come in and he would talk to, and he'd tell stories to the horses as well, as singing. And that whole thing about two worlds as well. You've got the horse that is so down to earth and connected with the earth, but this also is a symbol of freedom. And white horses for him, and in traveller lore, that actually thought to be really unlucky. And part of that is because they stand out in the dark. So if you're trying to hide and you don't want any trouble, and you don't want the burkas, the body snatchers, to find you, or anybody to turf you off the land, if you've got a horse and there's a white horse and the moon shining on it, you're going to get found. But part of it is this thing of like attracts like, and if you've got a white horse, it attracts white spirits, and you're more likely to get ghosts and things coming to bother you. But if you look through the ears of a white horse, then you can see what they see. And there's this thing of horses being able to see into the other world. And when you look through, particularly white horses, if you look through the ears, then you can see the other world and things that happen. There's some beautiful stories about that. And I think that's the thing, where there's so many places where you go into the hill and you walk into that other world and back out again. It's a white horse that leads you. And I love that phrase though, kind of, but there's one all short, and it's the top man. And it
Yeah,
was so down to earth, and
yeah,
yet so kind of integral to the whole of the mythology of this land.
yeah, yeah,
King Arthur, the
yeah.
sleeping king needing a mount.
Mm,
The juxtaposition is
mm,
just completely magical.
mm. I love that the reference to the king as being the top man. It's just great.
That's
It's so down to earth. It's beautiful. It has all of that respect and also and a relationship, and it keeps it all on the ground. I just think it's extraordinary, really. And the fact that it never names anyone. There's lots of versions that name Merlin or name the king or whatever, and it doesn't. It just keeps it right. And it keeps the mystery alive too, which I think is really beautiful. But the
But tell us.
horses. Go on. Sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say about the horse. This thing of. I think I must have in one of my fantastical journeys through making telling the story in different ways. I think I found the phrase that when the yeah. So when he's filled his boots and his hat and his coat with all the money, he's about to leave, and the old man takes him and says, "Now, before you leave," this is a version that I told a long time ago, and I found myself using it, and I think it's quite an interesting phrase for lots of different ways, but reasons. But I found myself saying, "Now, what you've seen here, as one day the horse will carry the king, you must carry with you what you've seen here. And though this is a mystery, it's no secret. Tell everyone who has the ears to listen." And then off he goes. And I still stand by a lot of that, really, even though that's my own embellishment. I still stand by that the knowledge is not a secret. It's a mystery, and it's not a secret. And I think that's really important about this, certainly for me in this story, the relationship to the Edge and Alderley Edge generally, but that the horse carries the king and you must carry the story. And so that's why I chose the Mare, really, because why this story is so important, because I carry this story like a horse, I need to, I have a sort of, that's my relationship to it. And the journey of the horse, he goes in with the horse and he comes out without the horse. I don't know. It's so many. It's definitely. We talked earlier on about all the other stories that have a white mare in them between worlds. There's Tam Lin. So for those of you who don't know, the Ballad of Tam Lin, where in some versions it's Lady Margaret and some versions it's Janet. Meets a man in the woods who's a fairy, and he says, I'm actually human, and I was kidnapped and taken prisoner into the fairy world, but you can come and release me. You can release me on Halloween. And you go to the crossroads, and there you'll see the fairy company will ride by, and the first will go on horses black and the second will go on horses brown. But then you'll see a milk white horse, and I'll be on the back of it, one hand gloved and the other hand bare. And that's how you'll know me. And then
it's not just a horse, it's a mare. It's always a mare.
It's
always
exactly
a
the
mare.
milk white mare. So between worlds, so the horse, this white mare is carrying between worlds. So we've got that, and then we've got the sleeping king, and then we've got the Mabinogion story of Rhiannon, traveling from fairy world to this world on a white mare, and then Oisin, yeah, exactly. In fact, I was looking at that story earlier on. It's a fantastic story, but again, the white mare that rides off into the sea when Oisin falls to the ground and 300 years are upon him.
But safe on her back, and he's told. So he comes back from the land of summer, from the land of the west, and he's told he must not get off the horse.
Yeah.
He must not get off the mare, and she'll bear.
And he doesn't care for her. He doesn't feed her. He just rides her and rides her until she's too fatigued. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, there's a fantastic film made in the early 90s called Into the West, an Irish film with Gabriel Byrne as the King of the Gypsies. It's fantastic. Really beautiful film. I mean, it's a children's film, but it's pure fantasy, but it's utterly beautiful, and it's got that story right at its heart. It's a wonderful journey. Anyway,
yeah. But, So yeah, go and look at the film and the story if you don't know. We've probably got time to tell the whole story. And I know that, I mean, we could go on all night. We're running short of time. We're going to have to choose what to do.
Now, well,
Jane is asking about why always a mare.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you?
No, I don't either. Why would a farmer have a mare? I mean, you'd use a gelding if you were working it. You'd be using a gelding. You wouldn't have a mare. Unless it was, unless he was a breeder, but I don't know. I absolutely don't know. But I think
it doesn't sound like he is a breeder.
No, it doesn't. No, it's certainly a crap horse seller. Anyway,
but the milk white. It's you know something special about a horse when it's milk white because it's not. You would normally say grey, and it's not. But fairy animals are white, and maybe that's the albino or not. They quite often have red ears. They quite often have red eyes. So you have like in the Lady of Llyn y Vac, it's the white cattle that she brings up, and there's still a herd of white cattle in Wales that are supposed to be descended from Llyn y Vac. Round here, my version of the Sleeping King is Wild Edric, which is very different to yours. But he has, he's the leader of the Wild Hunt. He's sleeping beneath the hill, but he rides out with the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt are white hounds. They're fairy hounds with red ears and red eyes. And there's definitely a thing if you can tell the fairy animals, but I don't know why it's always a milk white mare. That's the mount. It just is. And we were talking about the Mare as well, again, who's the a white mare, though she tends to be called a grey mare. I don't know if that's just a translation thing. And again comes out at one of those edge places, the in-between places, Christmas and New Year, when it's neither one time nor another. And they are, for some reason, it's the white mares that can travel between worlds, and maybe it's linked with white horses on the sea, and the way that they travel between the worlds. Absolutely, there is the whole thing about female mystery and female power.
I think that's definitely clear in the Rhiannon story. Definitely, this and there's some ideas of there being a horse cult, the Celtic kind of a Celtic horse cult, and that Rhiannon sort of represents that to some degree. So, and certainly, the Uffington White Horse is a good example of that. So I don't know. Yeah, no, it's a good question. Now I saw somebody popping up in the chat. Why didn't the top man have a horse? I don't know. It's fascinating.
Without it, there wouldn't be a story. That's why.
That's true. Yeah.
And you have to wait for the right time and the right place.
Yeah.
And maybe he doesn't have a horse because we need the hope.
Yeah.
We need the story. Yeah. You've got to wait for the right horse to be born, but also. Yeah. Again, it's that responsibility to carry the story. So take the treasure, but take the story with you. Yeah. You've got to tell the story. So that we know that there is that magic beneath the earth.
Apparently, even during the war, the Second World War, there was talk of how to wake up the sleeping king at our time of peril. Actually, there was a lot of people in Alderley that believe now was our greatest time. This is the last battle of the world, and how will we wake them? But of course, the thing about the story really works very deeply, and the story is really about the sleeping king is our potential. And if we wake him, we lose it, and I think that's something. The mystery. I'm a great believer in the mystery of the story is its power, not in what it says, but what it doesn't say, and what that leads you to. I spent a bit of time up there on a project with the fiddler John Dipper and Liz Garner, Alan's daughter. And we started making some things about the place, and I was fascinated by having opened up the story in myself, and then went back up there and sort of listened to the place and tried to find ways into the mythology of the place that beyond the story, beyond the legend, and found myself making something. In fact, actually, I tell you what, can I share this before we? Because it's going to be
absolutely yes. And I was going to ask you to.
Yeah. So this is just a short poem that I wrote. So John Dipper played the tune. He was walking around the edge and he was sort of just riffing, and he made this piece while he was walking, and then recorded it. And I heard it, and I found myself just just sort of making a poem that fitted in with that is very much about what we're talking about. So here it goes. Hope you can hear it. Can you hear that? Just check.
Yes.
Good. Right, back to the beginning.
Then turn away from the well and look below. Beyond slutch and leaves and brother to the field. Do you see her? The mare, rooting. Melch as the moon and strong as the neat. Look to the umber and see the lad. A yip-yap, all limbs and lanky, ormin, gawping, see how he stares. He's thinking himself on her, lommering up the hill of her, breathless. Now look up, scan your eyes against the shim, to where the rock rims the sun, and see the horse and the man riding the back of the hill. Look back to the field. Now do you see the man in the boy, the horse in the hill, the crown in the well?
Just gorgeous. So I don't know. I could hear it beautifully. Shane was saying it's dropping in and out. Could other people hear it? Is it just Shane?
Yep.
Oh, good. Well, I'm sorry that you couldn't hear it properly, Shane. I'm pleased that everybody else did.
I can put I think I put it in a Dropbox folder, so I can always share that if people want to hear it.
It's so beautiful. I absolutely love it, and it has the feel of the story. It has, and the music and the heart of that story. Yeah, for me, they're. It's. I love the way that you tell the story, and then that feels kind of like the soul.
Yeah, yeah. We started to make a few kind of dialect things, which were kind of opening up the possibility that there was mythology to be had there on the up on the site, because actually Alderley Edge has a very long history. You can walk around and find flint knappings from Mesolithic tribes that pass through, and there are some markings on stones that have been there since the Bronze Age. A lot of the caves were Bronze Age caves as well, and around mining in the Bronze Age period, you can imagine there's a huge amount of ritual to be had. So the place is obviously a very sacred place for a lot of people over a very long period of time. And in fact, the Sleeping King story is almost like the tip of the iceberg, because that's a more recent, relatively more recent idea. But interestingly, though, it is the earliest site of bronze making in the country. and the idea of the king, the sword in the stone, the one who has the power is the one who can draw the sword from the stone. Not pulling a sword out of a stone, but draw the sword from stone, so that it's, at its heart, it is a smith's story, which is kind of what makes it interesting about Alan's grandfather, because he was a smith and he worked at the foot of the hill. So there is a kind of a lineage in there of wisdom and knowledge, local wisdom and knowledge, which I find fascinating. Yeah.
Well, and smiths have always been magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're always they've been the holders of the wisdom and the secret knowledge. And I did promise that there will be a Q&A, so I'm going to make sure that you do have a chance. Get your questions ready. But you're saying about the flint arrowheads, and it's you're not really supposed to take them these days, are you? Because it's owned by the National Trust, and that's changed the feeling of the site a bit, hasn't it?
It has. So it was gifted to the National Trust by the Pilkington family. Now, the Pilkingtons were very wealthy family. Pilkington Glass, it's that family. So it was a huge family. Anyway, they lived in Alderley Edge, and they gifted it to the National Trust. I think maybe in the 60s, maybe even late 50s. But so it was owned by the National Trust when I was a kid, but they had no interest they just barely managed it. This was before the National Trust had really cut its teeth in land management and site management and their responsibilities. And so when we used to go up there on Halloween was the time that there was always a huge gathering of people, and it was quite a lawless, because Halloween and Mischief Night were always very close when we were kids. I think it was the night before was Mischief Night, or maybe 2 nights before. But people used to go up on Halloween, and it was quite a lawless place overnight. But when I started telling stories, I wrote to the National Trust and said I'd really like to come and tell the story there. Perhaps I could go there up on Halloween. And the letter they wrote, which I still have here to this day, says, we do not want that story being told there. We do not want storytelling there. It does not help our management of the place at all to promote the mythology of the site. Of course, if you go there now, and it's quite a different story. But as an indication, there's a tiny little well or a little stone basin carved by a little cave. The cave's just a nook; it doesn't actually go anywhere. And I think it was carved by Alan's great-grandfather, who was a stonemason. Anyway, and the water drips down off a hole, and it dribbles down the rock, and then the basin is underneath. Now, when I was a kid, if you knew where the tree was, where the rhododendron tree was, because there weren't that many there was one further just down the hill, and there was one over on the left. If you got the leaf, only a rhododendron tree leaf would work. You'd stick it into the little hole by the water, and the water would trickle off the leaf, and then would make a lip, and then it would shoot out, and then you could cup it in your hands and drink it. If you took the leaf out, you couldn't drink it. You'd be scraping it off rock, which is not what you wanted to do. So when I was young, there was this thing that, if you got there and saw the leaf was there, well, you might be lucky. But when you've used it, you take the leaf away and you hide it, or you throw it away, because there was a kind of a question about knowledge, about who knew where the tree was. So there was this relationship to the place, and if you knew the place a bit and you knew where the branch was, then you could the tree was, then you could find the leaf to drink the water, and then you'd hide it again, and that was kind of the knowledge of it. But now, if you go there, the National Trust say that you should always make sure there's a leaf in there for everybody to drink from. So this change of relationship about how you manage it, because to me, the local knowledge of where the leaf was kind of an initiation in a way, if you like. It was kind of a threshold of knowledge that you would then feel included in, and then you would feel responsible to, and as indeed I do to the place. But then if you say it, well, always make sure there's a leaf in there for everybody, then you don't get to feel you don't get to feel that intimate relationship. So the way that it is managed is different. And I'm not casting aspersions about the National Trust. They have a tough job there, and they do it very, very well. and they clean it, and it's a fabulous place. So I get that, but it's a very different relationship to the one of someone who, as a kid grew up there from the bottom of the hill and would go up and explore it and find these little treasures around it. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it changes. It changes. And actually, when you go there now, I mean, I don't think anyone's interested in the myth, really. I mean, they've got huge pictures of artists' interpretation of the site, or artists' interpretation of the wizard, all that kind of stuff. And that's all well and good, but it's not the wizard. You could say it's the wizard, but it's the old fellow with his skeleton stick. To me, he's the old fellow with the skeleton stick.
Well, and again, it's about relationship and how you pass things on, isn't it? And there's a two-way street when you tell a story and somebody listens to it. It's not the same as putting a board up with just the bare bones of something. It's such an entirely different experience. And even though you have a set way of telling it, it's in a way that you want it. It's always going to be slightly different in every telling, and it's that back and forth, and it's weird because it kind of, in a different way, it's like Zoom, isn't it? It's, for me, storytelling is about having a conversation with the landscape a lot of the time, because we just live on a totally different time scale to the land. Mountains and hills, they live in this eternal space, kind of time still moves for them, but at such a different pace. And those kind of older stories, it feels for me like it's a place where mortals and mountains can have a conversation, where we can meet in this sort of separate time that we can both access.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the story is about an encounter with a deeper circle of time. That's really what it is. It's about this world and a horse that leads you into a deeper circle of time. You see something eternal. You enter a different speed of time, a time zone, and then you come out again. And what have you got? I mean, that's it. Yeah, absolutely.
And you can't take the treasure back from that. You can't fill your boots with gold and everything. But that doesn't mean you can't bring anything back. You just can't bring material stuff. Yeah. But you come back changed. Yeah. And there's so much more I want to talk to you about, but we have got to the ends of our hour. And now I've promised.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
There we go. Well,
but I'm still going to do the Q&A because I promised, so it's not really. So there's been a whole conversation on the chat about where the name Alderley comes from, which you can join in with or not if you know Nick. Otherwise, there's quite a lot of ideas. I don't know if anybody else has got any burning questions that they've wanted to ask Nick, or that I've skipped over, that they want to quickly ninja type now. Get on with the speedy keys.
I'm doing that. Let me just see if I can get this thingy in the chat.
Is that the link to your poem?
Yeah. See if I can find it. Get that in.
And I have to say as well that if you go to your website, then there are lots of amazing. One of the things that you've been doing recently are audio landscapes, and really working hard on that. And there's a different version of this story on there that has got a sound landscape to it as well. And you were talking about with the heartbeat. So you can listen to that, which is brilliant. But then lots of other fantastic stories. And there's lots of places that people go and hear you, aren't there? There's obviously the Stealing Thunder Festival.
Yeah, Stealing Thunder Festival. I haven't been doing that much work out and about. Partly, I mean, I didn't really recover very well from. I'm just sticking that up there. I didn't recover very well from lockdown financially. My work disappeared. But we were saying earlier on that you were the first person to say, "Will you do the digital?" Come online and do this digital arc, and I completely was, after that, I was transfixed by it all the way through lockdown. I got some funding and bought some good mics and became quite obsessed with live audio. So I did a few live audio performances, and then since then I've been making them. But also I've got this coffee van. For those who don't know, I've got a coffee van and I have silent disco headsets, and I have the audio cafe. So you can come to the coffee van and we put up a stretch tent and you can drink a coffee and listen to stories that last about sort of 6-7 minutes, or some of them are other recordings and things. I've got a few immersive audio recordings that people seem to like to listen to, like being on a cliff top surrounded by puffins, which is quite a nice one. But I'm expanding the audio cafe, and I will be setting up a Patreon account in the footsteps of the great Amy Douglas, and and it'll be podcasts and audio stuff that I'm making. It'll be called the Audio Cafe. So I can, because I love making this stuff, and even if nobody else wants to hear it, I want to keep making it. And I find it a great journey, particularly, I've got 2 young kids. I can't hit the road the way I used to. And 57 now last week. I don't particularly want to go out and endlessly trawl up and down the country for gigs here and there. So, so I'm and
also it's not that environmentally friendly. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I started on this journey before lockdown of wanting to explore this space that we can all join in with, that we can come together from all over the world, from all different time zones. It's more environmentally friendly, and there's so many accessibility issues. Again, I when I had young children, I felt so excluded from the storytelling scene because I couldn't get to anything. And wanting to really open that up for other people. And I think your audio cafe is going to be brilliant. I'm going to be your first patron. I'm waiting for you to open it. So yeah, we'll advertise it when it starts. It's not far off. It's nearly done, isn't it?
Yes, we're not far off. I need a little back catalogue. I've got a back catalogue of stories already and other things to drop. But I haven't managed to start the podcast yet. You are going to be my first interview for podcast at some point, and we were going to do it earlier on last month, but weather-wise we couldn't do it. So we will get around to doing it.
Yeah, but we're going to go down the lead mines. It's going to be great.
The thing is, when you're performing or you're telling stories, you don't really get the chance to really look under the bonnet and talk and explore these things. And I just find it all so fascinating. I think storytelling or what we've been doing or what we do has got so much to say. Without being, the big next bestseller or anything like that. When we give up all of those ideas, there's actually some really important stuff, I think, to explore with storytelling. And our relationship to the tradition, our relationship to the story that comes to us, all of those sorts of things which are very out of fashion in the modern world, but are really, really important. And I think if there's nothing else we need to be holding those banners for that, because that's our thing. Duncan would say that.
And there's my advert for taking the tradition on sorted for going on into the future, I think.
You're welcome.
And I think that is the perfect place to leave it. So thank you very much to everybody who's come.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to everybody who's come to this point and is with us and has listened to the end. Come with us on this journey. You are always welcome whenever and wherever you are. And thank you so much to Nick Hennessey for helping me
Amy,
to take the tradition on.